21. Black bands. From the 1970s, with the most tragic fates. Welcome to Legends of Black Excellence. What if we told you that some of the most iconic black bands of the 1970s, groups that made the world dance, were hiding tragedies so dark they were almost erased from history, from fatal crashes to unspeakable backstage horrors? This isn't the story you saw on TV. It's the truth. The industry never wanted you to hear. Stick around, because what you're about to discover will change how you listen to these legends forever. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. These are stories you won't find anywhere else. The Bar-Kays. In the mid-1960s, the Bar-Kays were just teenagers from Memphis, Tennessee, fusing rhythm and soul in their high school halls. By 1967, they had transformed into a powerhouse funk ensemble, releasing the infectious instrumental track Soul Finger, which instantly earned them recognition as one of the most promising young groups of the decade. Their raw energy and horn-driven sound captured the attention of Stax Records, and more fatefully, the legendary Otis Redding. That same year, they became Redding's touring band, backing him on stage during his final tour. For the Bar-Kays, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. But that life-altering chance turned into a national tragedy on December 10, 1967. While en route to a performance in Madison, Wisconsin, their aircraft, a Beechcraft H-18, crashed into the icy waters of Lake Monona. The impact was devastating. Of the 8 individuals aboard, 7 perished. Among them were Otis Redding and 4 of the young Bar-Kays: Jimmy King, Ronnie Caldwell, Phelan Jones, and Carl Cunningham. Trumpeter Ben Cauley miraculously survived. Thrown clear from the wreckage because he hadn't fastened his seatbelt, he was found floating, clinging to a seat cushion, his breath shallow and chest burning in the freezing water. His trumpet, once a symbol of youthful ambition, lay silent beside him. The only other Bar-Kays member not on the flight, bassist James Alexander, had been assigned to rent a car and was waiting at the airport when he noticed a plume of smoke rising over the lake. He would later say he felt an unexplainable, soul-deep knowing that something was irreversibly wrong. In a tragic twist of timing, just 3 days earlier, Redding had recorded, sitting on the dock of the bay, a mournful, introspective ballad that would become his first posthumous #1 hit and a de facto farewell to the world. The Bar-Kays disbanded briefly after the crash, with Alexander and Cauley left to grieve not just their bandmates, but their brothers. Years later, they regrouped with new members, evolving into a staple act of the funk era, collaborating with Isaac Hayes and delivering hits like Shake Your Rump to the funk. Yet the original Bar-Kays lineup remains frozen in time, youthful, hopeful, full of promise. Their story is not just about what was lost in that lake, but what might have been had the skies stayed calm. For music historians and soul enthusiasts alike, the Bar-Kays' tragedy is a haunting chapter of unrealized potential written in water and silence. Heatwave. In the vibrant disco soul landscape of the late 1970s, Heatwave emerged as a transatlantic powerhouse. Formed by American brothers Johnny and Keith Wilder, along with a rotating lineup of talented musicians from the US and Europe. Heatwave was known for infectious grooves, silky harmonies, and crossover appeal. Their breakout hit Boogie Nights in 1976 set dance floors ablaze across continents. Follow-ups like Always and Forever and The Groove Line confirmed their dominance as one of the most sophisticated acts of the era. At the heart of the band stood Johnny Wilder Jr., a man whose voice had the warmth of a lullaby and the control of a seasoned jazz crooner. Often likened to Marvin Gaye for his tender phrasing, Johnny also brought spiritual depth to the group. But at the peak of their acclaim, tragedy struck. On a cold February night in 1979, just after a performance in Dayton, Ohio, Johnny was driving his girlfriend and brother home. A speeding delivery truck ran a red light and smashed into the driver's side. The force of the impact fractured Johnny's spine and crushed his nervous system, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. Rushed to the ICU, doctors informed him he would never walk or possibly sing again. In that moment, most performers might have surrendered to despair. Not Johnny. When told of his prognosis, His only question was, can I still sing against every odd? He began to compose again, using a chin-operated stylus and dictating rhythms through labored breaths. Despite full-body paralysis, he recorded gospel tracks and continued releasing music privately. His willpower defied every medical limitation. Though he left the public eye, his presence in Heatwave never faded. The band attempted to continue with new frontmen, but they could never recapture the magic of Johnny's vocal intimacy. In 2006, Johnny Wilder Jr. passed away at the age of 56. Two of his last written songs remain unreleased, sitting quietly on a shelf, a poetic echo of a voice that refused to fade. Heatwave's legacy is thus split in two. One half is golden, filled with pulsing rhythms and romantic ballads. The other a stark reminder of how quickly fortune can turn. Johnny's story is one of devastation, but even more so of resilience. He showed the world that music could still flow even when the body can't move. That's not just talent, that's soul. The Sequence. Before Salt and Pepper, before Queen Latifah, before Missy Elliott, there was The Sequence. Bursting onto the scene in 1979, this all-black female trio from Columbia, South Carolina, broke barriers as the first women to release a rap record in the United States. Their debut single, Funk You Up, became a Billboard hit, fusing the growing hip-hop sound with infectious funk rhythms. Composed of Angie Stone, then known as Angie B. Sherrill, The Pearl Cook, and Gwendolyn Blondie Chisholm, The Sequence was more than a novelty, they were pioneers. At a time when hip-hop was still male-dominated and largely underground, The Sequence brought glamour groove and lyrical wit. Signed by Sugar Hill Records, they toured nationally and paved the way for female voices in a genre still in its infancy. Though their reign was brief, their impact reverberated for decades. After their group disbanded in the early 1980s, Angie Stone went on to enjoy solo success in R&B and neo-soul, releasing acclaimed albums like Black Diamond and Mahogany Soul. Yet the memory of her roots with The Sequence remained close to her heart. Then, in March 2025, tragedy struck. Angie Stone performed at a tribute event in Atlanta, honoring women in hip-hop. After an electrifying rendition of Funk You Up, she left the venue riding as a passenger in a car heading through Cascade Road. An SUV ran a red light and collided with the passenger side where she sat. The vehicle spun, crashing into a street lamp. Emergency crews took 20 minutes to extract her from the wreck. Despite intensive surgery, Angie died at 3:42 a.m. from a ruptured aorta and massive chest trauma. She was 63. Her death sent shockwaves through the hip-hop and R&B community. At her funeral, a vinyl of Funk You Up was placed atop the casket, along with a photo of The Sequence in their early years, 3 young women grinning in oversized shades, ready to take on the world. There was no talk of a reunion after that, no legacy tour. Angie's passing marked the final chapter for The Sequence. They had opened the doors but walked away before the credit ever caught up. Their fate serves as both tribute and warning. Even trailblazers can be forgotten, and too often the curtain falls with no encore. Fats Domino Band. Behind the smooth piano rolls and unforgettable voice of Fats Domino stood a band that brought rock and roll to life on the stage. Known for hits like Blueberry Hill, Ain't That a Shame, and I'm Walkin' Fats Domino wasn't a solo act in the traditional sense. His touring band was a tight, cohesive unit rooted in New Orleans' musical tradition and driven by jazz, blues, and Caribbean rhythms. These musicians weren't backup, they were the soul of the show. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, they played relentlessly across segregated states, often navigating dangerous routes to reach southern venues that barely tolerated black performers. Yet they persevered, creating a legacy of live music that thrilled both white and black audiences alike. Clarence "Sonny" Fields, the band's saxophonist, was a standout, not just for his explosive solos, but for the heart he poured into every note. But in the fall of 1970, tragedy crashed the beat. On September 18th, after a show in Baton Rouge, 6 of the band's members boarded a van to return to Slidell, Louisiana. The weather was stormy, visibility low. Somewhere along a curved stretch of Highway 190, a truck veered across the center line and struck the van head-on. The collision was catastrophic. Clarence Fields died instantly, his saxophone crushed against his chest in the mangled vehicle. 3 others were hospitalized with critical injuries. Fats Domino, who had traveled separately for an interview, was spared the physical impact, but emotionally, he was shattered. It's said that after hearing the news, Fats sat in silence for hours, unable to speak. Fields was buried in New Orleans 5 days later, his broken sax resting beside him. After that, the band continued to perform, but those who watched closely noticed something missing. Fats never again spoke publicly about Sonny, and the right side of the stage where Sonny once stood was intentionally left unoccupied. Though the world remembers Fats Domino as a rock and roll pioneer, few know the cost paid by the musicians who helped build that legacy. The road had always been dangerous, but that night in 1970 it became a tomb for the very rhythm that had carried them. KC and the Sunshine Band. In the golden glow of 1970s disco, few groups captured the party spirit like KC and the Sunshine Band. Formed in Miami by Harry Wayne Casey, the band's high-energy blend of funk Latin percussion and brassy instrumentation produced era-defining hits like Get Down Tonight, That's the Way I Like It, and Shake Your Booty. They dominated dance floors and radio waves across America. At the center of their tightly wound sound was guitarist Jerome Smith. Often quiet, Jerome let his fingers speak, slicing through rhythms with a funk edge that grounded every track. He wasn't flashy, but he was vital, a rhythm anchor whose precision made the band's infectious grooves irresistible. But beneath the shimmering disco lights was a darker truth. Despite the band's success, Smith wasn't reaping the rewards. A bitter royalty dispute in the late 80s left him without proper credit or financial compensation for his work. While reissues and remastered albums raked in money, Smith had moved on working construction to survive. On July 28, 2000, Jerome Smith was operating a bulldozer at a construction site in West Palm Beach, Florida. He fell from the vehicle and was crushed beneath its heavy wheels. He died instantly at age 47. A funk legend passed away in silence, far from the spotlight he helped create. The most heartbreaking detail: 6 months before his death, Smith had sent a letter requesting medical and financial assistance. It was ignored. When his body was found, his occupation was listed simply as manual laborer. His death rattled the group. KC and the Sunshine Band ceased live performances for 2 years. Though they eventually returned to the stage, they never replaced Smith. His guitar riffs, preserved from past recordings, were played during shows as a memorial, but the dynamic was never the same. Jerome's story is more than an accident. It's an indictment of an industry that often discards the very talents that built its foundation. His fate is a haunting reminder that behind the upbeat rhythms and platinum records, some artists dance through pain, play through injustice, and leave this world without the recognition they deserved. The Temptations. No discussion of black music in the 20th century is complete without The Temptations. As one of Motown's crown jewels, they gave the world classics like My Girl, Papa Was a Rolling Stone and Ain't Too Proud to Beg. Their unmatched vocal layering, sharp choreography, and bold stage suits defined an entire era. Yet behind the hits lay an ever-changing roster, personal demons, and tragedy that tore at the group's foundation, none more heartbreaking than the fate of founding member Paul Williams. Williams wasn't just another voice, he was the glue. His rich baritone grounded the group's harmonies, and his choreography became the standard for Motown showmanship. But as the group's fame soared, Paul's health and spirit faltered. Struggling with chronic sickle cell anemia and deepening depression, he also battled alcoholism. Despite his central role, Williams was quietly removed from touring duties in 1971, replaced on stage even as he remained on payroll and in studio sessions. Then, on August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found dead in a car parked in an alleyway in Detroit. A gun was discovered in his hand, and the official ruling was suicide. But the circumstances raised suspicions. No fingerprints were found on the weapon, and no suicide note was ever located. Compounding the mystery was Paul's dire financial situation. Though a founding member, he received far less in royalties than his peers and had resorted to trying to sell unreleased tracks like "Feel Like Giving Up" to pay for his wife's medical treatment. His death marked the end of what many fans consider the Temptations' golden lineup. The group carried on, but something essential had been lost, not just in vocal harmony, but in soul. Paul Williams died without ceremony, buried with limited fanfare. A founder forgotten by the machine he helped build. His is the story of a man whose voice brought joy to millions, but whose pain was never fully heard. The Dells. Long before the flashy lights of disco or the smooth grooves of 1970s soul, the Dells were already seasoned veterans. Formed in 1952 in Harvey, Illinois, this five-man harmony group transitioned effortlessly from doo-wop to deep soul, scoring lasting hits like "Oh What a Night" and "Stay in My Corner." By the time the 1970s rolled around, they had become revered figures in the Midwest's black music scene, known for their rich vocals and emotionally raw ballads. But despite their veteran status, the Dells were not immune to the peril that seemed to shadow black touring acts of the era. On March 12, 1970, after performing in Milwaukee, their tour bus skidded off a frozen highway on Interstate 94 and crashed into a barrier. The scene was chaos. Ice darkness and silence followed as amplifiers and equipment crushed the rear section of the vehicle. The driver died instantly. 3 members were seriously injured, pinned beneath metal. Help took nearly 40 minutes to arrive, delayed some believe because the accident occurred in a predominantly black neighborhood often neglected by first responders. Michael McGill, the group's deep-voiced bass, was pulled from the wreckage without a pulse. A young, inexperienced medical examiner declared him dead without performing thorough checks. He was zipped into a body bag and transported to the morgue. But 5 hours later, as a nurse prepared to match dental records, McGill suddenly took a breath alive, confused and disoriented. He had no memory of who he was for nearly 3 weeks. It was a near-death experience that would haunt the group forever. In the aftermath, the Dells canceled all tours for the next 5 years. Though they returned to the stage eventually, they never played Milwaukee again. Future contracts included specific clauses: only hire vetted drivers, never travel in unfamiliar weather conditions, and avoid cheap rentals. They didn't need superstition, just survival. Despite the near loss, McGill continued performing until the group's retirement decades later. But the memory of that night lingered like a scar beneath their polished performances. Their story wasn't one of a tragic ending, but rather a terrifying glimpse at how close legacy and loss can sit side by side in the music world. The O'Jays. By the early 1970s, the O'Jays were riding high atop the soul charts with socially charged anthems like "Backstabbers" and "Love Train." Hailing from Canton, Ohio, the trio of Eddie Levert, Walter Williams, and William Powell had emerged as pioneers of the Philadelphia soul movement, blending sharp political commentary with irresistible melodies. They had just signed a lucrative contract with CBS Records, their legacy seemingly secure. But on the night of September 14, 1973, fate turned the wheel. Driving themselves after a tour stop, the group's car descended a wet slope on Interstate 76. Without warning, the vehicle lost traction, spun sideways, and skidded nearly 80 meters before tipping onto its side. Inside, chaos. Walter Williams struck his head on a window and passed out. William Powell was pinned between 2 seat frames, his body twisted and unable to move. Eddie Levert emerged physically unharmed, but with a secret he would carry for years. Unbeknownst to the public, Eddie had been the one behind the wheel that night, having swapped seats with their designated driver for fun. When news of the crash reached the label, they quickly orchestrated a cover-up, registering an unnamed technician as the driver to shield Levert's reputation and the new deal. Eddie never publicly confirmed the switch, but those close to him noted that he never drove again, always sitting silently in the back seat on future journeys. Though Powell survived the crash, he was never the same. He began forgetting lyrics on stage and struggled to sustain his once powerful vocals. He receded behind the curtains, often performing backup off stage. In 1977, Powell succumbed to cancer at age 35. The group performed that very night, but before going on stage, Eddie Levert reportedly stood in front of the dressing room mirror, punched it, and shattered the glass. That crack marked the emotional fracture of the group. The OJs continued making hits, but something deeper had broken. Behind every harmony was a memory of that rainy night, a secret never fully addressed, and a silence that echoed louder than applause. The Spinners, known for their impeccable vocal arrangements and emotional depth, the Spinners rose to prominence in the early 1970s with timeless soul records like I'll Be Around, Could It Be, I'm Falling in Love, and Then Came You. Originating from Detroit and later thriving under the Philadelphia sound, their concerts were exercises in precision, flawless harmonies paired with synchronized stage movement. But one such routine would nearly end a voice forever. In October 1974, the group was performing at the Spectrum Theater in Philadelphia, a grand venue packed with thousands of fans. During their hit, one-of-a-kind love affair lead singer Bobby Smith stepped backward in the middle of a choreographed sequence. What no one told the group was that a section of the rear stage platform had been removed for lighting adjustments. Smith fell straight down a 9-foot pit, landing hard. No scream, just a sickening thud. The music continued for nearly 10 seconds before anyone realized something was wrong. Smith was rushed to the hospital. His spine had been jarred and his right leg had lost significant sensation. He spent over 6 weeks in recovery and required a year of physical therapy just to return to the stage. Even then, he could no longer descend stairs unaided and struggled to hit his trademark falsetto notes. The group was forced to cancel 17 tour dates, losing nearly $200,000 in revenue. Worse, the event organizer refused to pay Smith's medical costs, claiming the stage design issue fell outside the event's liability coverage. Though Bobby eventually returned to perform, he never fully regained his former strength. From that moment on, the Spinners changed how they moved on stage. Rehearsals became cautious. Lighting crews were given strict guidelines. Every time the stage lights dimmed, members instinctively glanced behind them as if haunted by that fall. The group remained active for decades, but behind the choreography was a quiet trauma, one wrong step, one missing plank, and the soul of their harmony nearly vanished. The Chi-Lites, emerging from Chicago's South Side. The Chi-Lites became soul royalty in the 1970s with heartfelt ballads like Have You Seen Her and Oh Girl. Their music resonated with raw emotion, love, heartbreak, and longing. But while fans swooned over their harmonies and slick presentation few knew, the band was operating under tight budgets and harsh realities. As fame grew, financial constraints often forced them to cut corners, even when it came to transportation. In November 1976, while en route to a scheduled concert in Cleveland, the group rented a cheap, unmarked van. It lacked basic safety documentation and was not built for harsh weather conditions. Rain fell steadily that night as they cruised along Interstate 71. With visibility reduced and the tires worn, the van slid uncontrollably on a wet curve and flipped over. Marshall Thompson, the group's co-founder and lead percussionist, was seated near the front. When the van rolled, his head slammed violently into the windshield. A large shard of glass sliced through his face, narrowly missing his eye. Though he survived, the damage to his right eye was permanent, his vision reduced by nearly 40%. Worse, the group's insurance claim was denied due to incomplete vehicle paperwork. The financial burden fell on them directly, costing over $70,000 in medical and tour losses. Thompson was hospitalized for days. Once discharged, he began wearing dark sunglasses on stage, not as a fashion choice, but to conceal the constant tearing and light sensitivity that plagued him. For the next few years, every time he sang Have You Seen Her, the irony of not being able to fully see his audience weighed heavily. Despite the injury, the Chi-Lites never stopped performing, but that crash changed how they operated. Gone were the unvetted vans and last-minute rentals. Every trip was double-checked. Every corner of the stage became a space of caution. The accident didn't take their music, but it did take something more personal, their sense of invincibility. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Earth, Wind, and Fire wasn't just a band, they were an institution. Led by visionary Maurice White, the group revolutionized funk, soul, and jazz with cosmic themes, soaring harmonies, and dazzling stagecraft. Hits like Shining Star September and Reasons made them musical trailblazers. But the same creativity that launched them into stardom nearly cost them everything on a single summer night. On June 28, 1975, during a performance at the Denver Coliseum, Earth, Wind, and Fire had just launched into Shining Star when catastrophe struck. Their concerts were known for elaborate aerial rigs, custom-built platforms, and state-of-the-art lighting, many of which were pioneering at the time. But that evening, a heavy 18-kilogram KDU light fixture above the stage came loose. Without warning, it plunged nearly 4 meters from the ceiling and smashed directly onto Philip Bailey's left shoulder. The impact was brutal. Bones, cracked, blood splattered across his iconic gold microphone. The show halted in confusion as the audience gasped in horror. Bailey underwent emergency surgery. Though his life wasn't in danger, the injury left lasting damage. For months, he could not lift his arm above shoulder level. He had to relearn how to move, hold a mic, and perform choreography. To this day, he cannot fully raise his left hand while performing. Rather than discard the broken microphone, the group preserved it blood-stained, and all placing it in their Los Angeles studio as a grim reminder. Every concert since then has included a hidden stage assistant specifically tasked with mic handling and unspoken adjustment made after nearly losing their voice to falling light. Maurice White once said, "We built our empire on elevation, rising stages, rising spirits." But that night the sky tried to bring us down, and it nearly did. Earth, Wind, and Fire survived that incident, but their attitude toward safety transformed forever. No longer just innovators, they became guardians of their own well-being, proof that even stars must look over their shoulders when they shine too bright. The Isley Brothers. With a career spanning decades, the Isley Brothers are pillars of black musical innovation. Blending gospel, funk, R&B, and later rock, they were known for hits like That Lady, Fight the Power, and For the Love of You. As they toured relentlessly through the 1970s, their sound matured, but so did the physical and emotional toll of life on the road. In May 1979, while traveling through a winding stretch of mountainous Tennessee, the group's RV swerved to avoid a deer. The sudden maneuver caused the vehicle to roll violently 3 times before crashing against a ravine wall. Inside were founding member Ronald Isley and his younger brother Marvin Isley, the band's powerhouse bassist, known for his steady grooves and youthful energy. The wreck left Marvin with a fractured vertebra and internal bruising. Doctors initially feared he might lose mobility altogether. He spent over 8 weeks in a body brace, unable to walk without assistance. But the emotional weight fell hardest on Ronald. That very night, while Marvin lay unconscious in a hospital bed, Ronald quietly took out a notebook and wrote a will. He divided the band's profits evenly among the 6 core members, including Marvin just in case. Marvin eventually recovered, but he never again sat next to a window while touring. Ronald carried that folded will with him on every tour afterward, not out of paranoia, but as a reminder that tragedy can come even when you're at the top of the charts. The Isley Brothers never spoke publicly about the accident until much later. There was no media coverage, no canceled tour announcement. But internally, it was a turning point where the band's flashy stage presence was met by a newfound humility. After that, every decision from bus drivers to hotel floors was made with survival in mind. The RV crash didn't end their career, but it changed how they lived it. And behind every riff and falsetto that came afterward was a signature on a folded piece of paper that said, "We've come too far to lose this now." The Commodores. The Commodores, born out of Tuskegee Institute, were synonymous with versatility. They could funk up a stadium with Brick House and reduce you to tears with Easy. Their crossover appeal made them Motown's powerhouse in the late 70s. At the heart of their stage sound was Milan Williams, a quiet genius on the keyboards, whose melodies defined the group's sonic identity. In July 1978, just after 3 Times a Lady topped the Billboard Hot 100, the Commodores were preparing for a stadium concert in Texas. The venue had been hastily remodeled to accommodate their growing popularity. During a transition between songs, Williams stepped backward, unaware that part of the stage platform had not yet been completed. He fell 1.4 meters onto jagged iron flooring below. The impact shattered his wrist, severed tendons, and tore skin across his palm. He was rushed into emergency surgery, requiring 54 stitches and months of rehabilitation. Though his hand healed enough for basic play, he could no longer perform the elaborate solos and fast-fingered transitions that defined the Commodore's funk aesthetic. Williams returned to the band briefly, but when Lionel Richie announced his solo ambitions the following year, Milan quietly stepped away. There was no press conference, no official farewell, just absence. In a rare interview years later, Milan said, "They called it an accident. To me, it was a silent contract, a signal that my time had passed." Though the Commodores continued with replacement players and Richie soared as a solo artist, Milan's exit was never fully addressed. For fans who knew the band's roots, his absence was palpable, like a missing chord in a familiar melody. The fall didn't make headlines, but within the band it marked a fracture between past brilliance and the uncertain steps of the future. In the industry, Milan's name faded from the spotlight. But to those who listened closely, his influence echoed long after his hands left the keys. The Manhattans, known for their velvet harmonies and polished elegance, the Manhattans earned a devoted following in the 1970s with hits like Kiss and Say Goodbye and Shining Star. Their sound part soul part romantic drama was the soundtrack of Black love across America. Every performance was a carefully crafted experience, golden suits, smooth choreography, and a narrative flow that felt like a stage play with every note. But on one tragic evening in August 1976, the illusion shattered. The group was set to perform at a packed concert in Cleveland, Ohio. The venue had just installed new special effects equipment, including fog machines, a trend borrowed from rock shows to heighten the drama. As the opening chords of Shining Star played, the fog rolled in, blanketing the front of the stage in a dense, cloud-like mist. Gerald Alston, the group's magnetic lead singer, began his signature walk toward the audience when he stepped directly into the haze. Unbeknownst to him, a small tech pit normally covered during shows had been left exposed by stagehands. He plunged nearly 2 meters into darkness. There was no scream, just a thud. The audience assumed it was part of the show, and the band continued playing for several more seconds until someone noticed Alston wasn't rising. He was unconscious, bleeding with a mild concussion and neck strain. Paramedics rushed in. The show was canceled mid-set. Gerald recovered physically, but emotionally he was shaken. He would later admit that he lost all stage confidence after the fall. For 8 months, he refused to perform live. The group canceled nearly 20 scheduled performances, suffering major financial losses. Their record label reduced their promotional budget, viewing the pause as a loss in momentum. When the Manhattans finally returned to the stage, they made a firm decision: no fog, no haze, no visual tricks, just music and light. A clause was added to every performance rider: clear visibility must be maintained on all stage surfaces at all times. The fall didn't end their careers, but it left a permanent scar both on the group and in the mind of their lead vocalist. In an industry obsessed with illusion, one unseen misstep nearly stole their future. The mist was artificial, but the consequences were very real. The stylistics, with Russell Tompkins Jr.'s angelic falsetto soaring over lush arrangements. The stylistics brought a tender orchestral soul sound to the 1970s. Songs like You Make Me Feel Brand New Betcha by Golly Wow and Break Up to Make Up became instant classics. Their emotional vulnerability and polished harmonies carved them a special place in romantic soul history. But during a pivotal tour in 1977, their path was disrupted by a cruel twist of nature and negligence. The group was traveling by van on a long interstate route during a rainy summer evening. The roads were slick with oil and water, and the driver, fatigued from days of travel, lost control. The van hydroplaned and slammed into a guardrail, spinning violently before coming to rest on its side. Though all members survived, one suffered a cracked pelvis, and others sustained minor injuries. But what hit them hardest wasn't the crash itself, it was what came after. Inside the van were their brand-new custom stage suits, freshly purchased after 5 years of sharing outfits on tour. A toppled amplifier ignited a small electrical fire that damaged the garments beyond repair. The symbolism was brutal. Just as the group had scraped together the money to elevate their image and reclaim their pride, the crash took it all away in a heartbeat. The record label, already wary of their commercial plateau, cut the group's promotional support. U.S. tour dates were canceled. Radio play declined, with morale in pieces and support fading. The Stylistics made the decision to quietly retreat from the American market, focusing instead on audiences overseas, particularly in the UK and Asia. No member ever publicly spoke in depth about the crash. But longtime fans noticed the shift: less sparkle, fewer appearances, and a retreat from the spotlight that once adored them. It wasn't a fiery demise or a deadly incident, but it was enough. A slide on a wet road, a pile of burned dreams, and the unspoken feeling that some stars, no matter how bright, aren't meant to shine forever in the place they were born. The Delphonics. Emerging from the rich musical soil of Philadelphia, the Delphonics became soul legends through a delicate blend of orchestration and vulnerability. Their songs like "La La Means I Love You" and "Didn't I Blow Your Mind?" this time captured a generation's longing, dressed in smooth falsettos and dreamlike arrangements. By the late 1970s, they had earned the nickname the Black Beatles for their style harmonies and influence. But one rainy night in September 1977, adoration turned into alarm. After a triumphant show at the Spectrum Arena, the group was exiting Philadelphia, headed across the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. Two paparazzi on motorcycles had begun tailing their van, weaving through traffic and shining their headlights inside in hopes of catching post-show candids. Under the glare, drizzle, and pressure, their driver swerved violently to avoid a collision. The van skidded sideways, slammed into the bridge's guardrail, and stopped just 80 centimeters from plunging into the river below. Inside the vehicle, chaos reigned. Founding member Wilbert Hart was thrown forward. His forehead struck a metal post, splitting the skin open. Blood soaked the sleeve of his stage outfit, still immaculate from the performance moments earlier. He also fractured his collarbone in the fall, leaving him immobilized for weeks. In response, the group went into immediate lockdown. All press engagements were suspended. Touring was halted for 6 months. A strict rule was established: no nighttime departures without a police escort. The band's tone shifted from flashy elegance to cautious reclusion. Though they resumed performances the following year, something had dimmed. The glitz was there, but the ease, the willingness to engage the limelight had dulled. Interviews became rare. Stage exits were abrupt. The bridge incident was never publicly discussed, but insiders knew the Delphonics had come heartbreakingly close to being a headline about lives lost rather than voices loved. The Ohio Players, known for their erotic album covers, explosive live shows, and funk anthems like Fire and Love Roller Coaster, the Ohio Players were among the boldest acts of the 1970s. Blending raw energy with brassy precision, they made audiences sweat and dance with every note. But in winter 1974, just before a gig near the Met Center in Minneapolis, their fire was extinguished by something far colder. 3 of the band's members entered an old freight elevator to reach the green room. As they rose, a sudden blizzard knocked out power across the city. The elevator halted mid-shaft. Temperatures inside dropped rapidly below freezing. With no ventilation and no emergency lighting, the bandmates were trapped in absolute darkness. At first, they assumed someone would come, but minutes passed. Then an hour. They began shouting, banging on the walls, but staff, believing the band had taken a different route, never noticed. It took 90 minutes before the crew realized something was wrong. By then, Clarence Satchel, the group's saxophonist and flutist, had passed out from oxygen deprivation and cold exposure. He was rushed to a nearby hospital and placed in isolation for 3 days. The concert was canceled last minute, a rarity for the Ohio players who prided themselves on delivering under any conditions. After that incident, the group refused to use elevators in older venues. A designated tour monitor was hired to double-check all facilities before each show. In interviews, they would occasionally joke about it, but the truth was darker. Satchel never quite recovered his full lung capacity. His solos grew shorter, his stage presence more withdrawn. The band went on to enjoy further success, but behind the scenes, the trauma lingered. For a group built on heat and chaos, their most terrifying moment wasn't fire. It was cold, silent entrapment. A reminder that even in the loudest careers, sometimes it's the quietest moments that leave the deepest scars. The main ingredient, with their polished harmonies and warm vocal blend. The main ingredient carved a permanent place in 1970s soul with hits like Everybody Plays the Fool and Just Don't Want to Be Lonely. The trio, fronted by Tony Sylvester, Cuba Gooding Sr., and Luther Simmons Jr., offered a sound that was both accessible and sophisticated, winning over audiences from Harlem to Hollywood. By 1973, the group stood on the brink of mainstream stardom, rehearsing for their first nationwide television appearance and a landmark show at Radio City Music Hall. But on November 22, 1973, tragedy struck. After wrapping rehearsal at the Count Basie Theater in New Jersey, the band traveled on Route 35 toward Newark. Heavy rain blurred the windshield, and a military truck suddenly swerved into their lane without signaling. Their brown Dodge van slid into a ditch and flipped on its side. No one died, but the injuries were serious. Tony Sylvester, the group's core baritone, suffered a hard blow to the neck. Though he initially dismissed it as whiplash, the trauma led to chronic nerve pain that persisted for years. The van was totaled. Their gear was ruined. And worst of all, their high-profile November 25th Radio City Music Hall performance, meant to solidify their spot in the national spotlight, was missed. So too was their CBS spring television deal, a career-making opportunity, lost to the storm. Adding insult to injury, the military vehicle's driver was on active duty and protected under internal review. No compensation was ever provided. Sylvester was forced to take a 3-month hiatus, delaying the group's follow-up album. Though they eventually returned to performing, the buzz around them had cooled. The label, sensing hesitation from promoters, slowed down funding. In later interviews, group members would call it the rain that stole our leap. The main ingredient survived. They made more records, toured again. But the missed moment, the chance to elevate from respected act to household name, was gone. Not because of talent, not because of scandal, but because of one unmarked truck and one night of rain. The emotions, from their Chicago gospel roots to their platinum-certified Best of My Love. The emotions were the embodiment of divine harmonies and feminine strength. The sister trio Sheila Wanda and Jeanette Hutchinson stood out in a male-dominated industry by bringing both vocal power and elegance to funk and soul. By 1975, they were headlining nationwide tours and commanding respect across stages once reserved for male-fronted acts. But on June 14, 1975, during a show at the Baton Rouge Municipal Theater in Louisiana, that rising arc faltered. Dressed in flowing white silk gowns, the trio opened their set with So I Can Love You under a sophisticated stage setup. Suddenly, a 20-kilogram Fresnel light fell from a 4-meter height, crashing onto Sheila Hutchinson's right shoulder. She collapsed mid-performance but quickly rose, refusing to let the audience know she was in pain. Backstage, she was treated with ice and painkillers, determined to finish the show. The injury, a hairline fracture and severe bruising, was worsened by the band's grueling tour schedule. Promoters had already locked in payments, and canceling meant massive losses. Sheila performed injured for the next 6 weeks, adjusting dance routines to hide her limited movement. Only in July 1976 did Jet magazine publish a backstage exposé revealing the truth. Fans were shocked to learn she had endured an entire summer of performances in pain, often medicated and physically restricted. The sisters responded by demanding major changes, their own dedicated stage engineer custom lighting inspections, and a full ban on prefab stage rigs, a first for any all-female soul group. The injury never fully healed. Sheila regained motion but often wore subtle shoulder braces underneath her stage wear during intense choreography. While the emotions continued to soar, touring with Earth, Wind, and Fire and reaching new commercial peaks, the trauma remained an unspoken mark of the price they paid to stay on top. Their glittering dresses, pristine harmonies, and radiant smiles masked a backstage reality of resilience, injury, and quiet sacrifice. What happened in Baton Rouge wasn't just a mishap. It was a revelation. In a business that demanded women perform flawlessly, the emotions became pioneers, not just in music, but in defining their own safety and worth on the road. The Pointer Sisters. By the late 1970s, the Pointer Sisters were not just performers, they were a phenomenon. Known for their genre-defying versatility, the Oakland-born quartet glided effortlessly between jazz, funk, country, and pop. With hits like Yes We Can, Fairy Tale, and How Long Betcha Got a Chick on the Side, they shattered expectations of what a black female group could be. Their stage presence was electric, their harmonies divine, and their outfits flamboyant yet precise. But on a Sunday morning in March 1978, one routine ride to a charity show changed everything. The sisters Ruth, Anita, June, and Bonnie were en route to the Oakland Black Family Benefit Concert, a community event supporting underprivileged children. They were traveling in a hired vehicle through East 14th Street and 66th Avenue when an emergency fire truck from Station 18 made a sudden U-turn to respond to a nearby call. The group's driver attempted to brake but couldn't avoid a low-speed collision. The impact wasn't catastrophic, but it was brutal for Ruth Pointer, who sat unbuckled in the front passenger seat. She was thrown forward, her face striking the windshield. Her left cheek was split open, requiring 6 stitches and leaving her dazed and visibly bruised. Though the others were physically unharmed, the emotional shock rippled through them instantly. The timing couldn't have been worse. The accident forced the sisters to cancel their highly anticipated March 10th taping of Soul Train, a national broadcast expected to be their biggest media push of the year. That single performance could have introduced their evolving sound to millions of new viewers. Instead, they withdrew quietly, recovering in private and reassessing how they would handle future engagements. After the incident, the Pointer Sisters implemented a strict protocol: no commercial drivers unless vetted, and whenever possible, family members or longtime personnel would be behind the wheel. They also became outspoken advocates for performer safety on tour, supporting insurance reform and transportation protections for black artists. Though Ruth returned to the stage within 2 weeks, a faint scar remained visible only to the keenest observers. But more lasting than the physical mark was the shift in how the group moved: more deliberate, more guarded, less trusting of the world outside their tightly woven sisterhood. The Pointer Sisters went on to enjoy continued success, eventually winning Grammy Awards and dominating the 1980s with dance pop anthems like Jump for My Love and I'm So Excited. But in private, they never forgot that morning. It didn't stop their journey, but it did change how they traveled it, with eyes wide open and hands firmly on the wheel. These 21 legendary black bands didn't just shape the sound of the 1970s, they paid a price history rarely mentions. From fiery crashes to silent injuries, their stories reveal a darker truth behind the music we still cherish today. Were these tragedies mere accidents or part of a larger pattern of neglect and exploitation in the industry? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think these legends were protected the way they should have been? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story that honors black greatness. Only on Legends of Black Excellence.